So first of all, thank you everyone for coming. I know you've all got busy days, so thank you for taking the time to come along today. And thank you to Freya for helping to facilitate, and to Sarah from Amazing If, and also to Sharon for helping to get this set up. So the premise of this is the following. So you might not necessarily think about yourself working like this, but we all work within teams of different sizes, whether that be the big team of the IOA, or the smaller team that is your collaborational group that you work within. And the aim of this session is to help those teams to work better. We all contribute very uniquely and wonderfully to our teams, but there's always ways to make those teams work better and be more supportive for everyone. And I think Simon's testimonial that he gave in the email that we sent around summarised quite nicely for me, because I went along to the same session that he went along to before Christmas, that was run by Freya for line managers, about developing psychological safety in teams. And I came away from that thinking that the concepts that were in that course about promoting trust and openness within teams were relevant, not just for the line managers trying to instill that in their groups, but also for all the people who are within the teams as well. So that's the purpose of this session, is to roll this out to all of you, and it's part of a wider set of training that we're rolling out. So, for example, the line managers have been this week on conflict management training to help when more contentious issues arise in the workplace. And this session will be followed up later on with training for the trainers, for the line managers on how to implement that. And there'll be a further session after that to go to work with the teams. Anyway, so that's it from me. I'm going to hand over to Freya, who will be facilitating. I hope you enjoy the morning, which I'm sure will be great, and it will help to make the IOA a more supportive and a more friendly place, which is I'm sure what we all want.
Thanks, Mark. I don't think I need the mic, because I think this works around my neck. Hello, I think I know quite a few of you now. So I'm Freya, I'm from the Learning and Organisational Development team. I've been doing some sessions with some of the managers in IOA, I think, around trust and psychological safety in teams. So I'm just here as a bridge today to kind of be the facilitator in the room, just to help Sarah a bit, because she's remotely in London. So I might just be passing back some stuff to her if she can't hear well enough and things. I would say you're in for a real treat. We've had sessions. Sarah's done some stuff with the university before. I don't know if any of you are listeners to the Squiggly Career podcast. It's fantastic. If you haven't tried listening before, I would encourage you to have a listen. I think it's going to be a very fun, fast-paced. It's always fast-paced, so you'll need your pen and paper ready and be ready to interact a lot and be thinking and engaging. So over to you, Sarah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Freya. And hello, everybody. Really good to meet you. I think there's a chance for me to maybe see all of you. There we all are, which is very exciting. Thank you for choosing me over the sunshine. I know that is a hard choice to make, given how much sunshine we get in the UK. So I do really appreciate you spending the next hour and a bit with me, thinking a little bit about you, your learning, and how we also learn together in our teams. A few things about how the next kind of 90 minutes or so is going to work. So no PowerPoint slides to look forward to today. We draw. So we live draw the tools and the frameworks, and I'll be asking you to do the same. I think we should all agree together not to judge each other's drawings. Mainly you should agree not to judge my drawings too much. But the reason that we do that is because we want this learning to last. So I want you to enjoy today, to find it really useful. But I also mainly want it to be something that you put into practice tomorrow, next week, next month. So me showing you a load of slides is probably not going to help that. Whereas actually, if we design and develop this together today, much more likely to stick. It also needs to feel like yours. So rather than me just telling you about high performing teams, what we're going to do today is get a feel for like where you think you all are, what's working well, what are the even better ifs, as we would describe them. And we are going to generate ideas. I might suggest some ideas which you can critique, you can edit, you can make better so that they feel really relevant and right for you. And I hope that you just come away from this thinking about some very practical actions you might want to take individually and hopefully together as a team. So I'm going to share my screen now. If at any point something isn't working, you can't hear me properly, you've got a question, always kind of give Freya a shout and she knows she can interrupt me at any time. I'm hoping now you can all see the screen with some excellent stick figures going across that screen. Can I see a thumbs up from the room? See if I can also see the thumbs up. You'll give me thumbs up? Okay, yeah, I can see the thumbs up. When I ask you to wave on some certain moments as we go through, I might need slightly bigger waves than that. I got some very reserved thumbs up, like very polite. So I might need some big waves just as we go through, just to help me with where you all are. So thinking a bit about high-performing teams and why should we care? Why does thinking about a team where we trust each other, where we're all learning lots, kind of why does it matter? We always want to make sure we are clear on the why. If we think about careers historically, the classic career ladder, the staircase to climb that we're all very familiar with, teams in this kind of environment were much more, and certainly this is how I started my career for a long time, much more command and control. You know, someone was in charge, you waited to be told what to do. And you, if you're anything like me, I sort of obediently nodded along and kind of did what I was told. Didn't do an awful lot of thinking for myself, I don't think, when I first started out in my career. And it also, I was never really asked. I was never really asked for my opinion or for my ideas. And you always felt like people who were more senior had all of the answers. So you should just respect that and kind of follow in their footsteps. There was also, in the past, certainly, lots of evidence that even though we still sometimes feel like we work in silos, I still hear that all the time from loads of different types of organisations. And every organisation we work with, whether it's charities or public sector or kind of private or somewhere in between, everyone still says, you know, silos are a challenge. But previously, people worked much more with the same people in their teams. There was a lot less cross-functional working and a lot less collaboration, certainly than there is today. If anything, I was reading a really interesting article the other day about over-collaboration and like some of the challenges that can cause, particularly around tech, which I'm sure some of you will have experienced. You know, when you're just like, you're so busy collaborating, then the kind of challenge becomes, can you actually make progress on your job? So, you know, things often go the other way too. So what we see now in our careers and the way that our organisations feel, and this idea of careers feeling much more squiggly, where we are unlearning, relearning all of the time, where learning is the job, it's much more about how do we kind of create rather than wait when it comes to our learning, our growth and our development. Pretty much everybody works with other people. That will be unique to all of you in terms of the roles that you do. That could be collaborating with other researchers, that could be collaborating with other parts of the university, collaborating with people who are in the room today. But there is much more collaboration. And actually, when we work really well together as a team, it's how we learn the most. It's how we explore our potential. And it's how we really challenge ourselves to think about that learning, to really kind of accelerate that learning. And so what I wanted us to do together first today was really paint a picture of when we are in a high-performing team, what do we think that feels like? And what are the behaviours that you would expect to see? So I am hoping at some point, and that point could be right now, you've been in a high-performing team, or certainly you can imagine what a high-performing team might look and feel like. And just have a chat with a couple of people next to you. If you're not next to anyone, perhaps you could go next to somebody, just in twos or threes. What do you think it feels like to be in a high-performing team? And what are the behaviours? If you were a fly on the wall, observing that high-performing team for a week, what are the behaviours that you would see? And try to come up with, as a bit of a forcing function, 5 feelings and 5 behaviours, at least 5. If you've joined us online, we've got 1 or 2 people online. If you could do this exercise with me online, I can see you on Zoom, so we can do it on Zoom. I'll go on mute and just give you 10 minutes for this, just so that it's not noisy and kind of distracting for you. After 10 minutes, I will do some sort of dramatic wave. We'll come back together and we'll just get some feedback from the room, like what did we come up with, and see where we get to and see if there's anything that we might have missed that I can perhaps build on together. All feel good?
All good.
Great. 10 minutes, let's see what we get to.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Right, so I hope that felt useful just to start to bring to life the reality of what it feels like to be in a high-performing team. As you were doing that exercise, I thought I'll do the same. I'll think back to not where I am today, which I hope is also high-performing, but a team that I've been in before. How did it feel? What were the behaviours that I saw? So these were just some of my observations. And then let's see what I don't say. So as I go through, kind of think, oh, I've got to build on that, and I'll ask Freya perhaps to get some feedback from the room on anything that you'd written down that you've not heard me describe. So I think in a high-performing team, people feel pretty motivated. You tend to feel challenged. Really important to say in a high-performing team, there's usually high care and high challenge. So it's not all easy. Everyone's not kind of, the whole nice versus kind. People are usually kind, but it doesn't mean that you don't have challenging conversations. Those conversations, that kind of constructive challenge definitely happens. That definitely happened in that team I'm thinking of. I felt stretched. I think because the people around me were so good. I felt like I was sort of stretching myself, almost sometimes to keep up because they were so good at what they did. Definitely a sense of, I don't know if this is a real word, togetherness. Sort of that we were in it together, that you were supporting each other, and that when it mattered, you would always sort of back each other. There was definitely that sense. And I also wrote the word kind of care. I don't know whether this would be the same for everybody, but I really cared about those people that I was in that team with. And I even wrote down at the end, and I was sort of going back and forth about, like, oh, is that right or not? Because I've got mixed feelings about this one. I wrote friendship. If I think now about a few of my best friends, they come from that high-performing team. I think because we kind of created a really strong connection and a bond, I guess, that went beyond just that time, or the work we were doing in that moment almost created that connection that, we all went off in different directions to do different things. But, 3 or 4 of us, are actually on a WhatsApp group together, even now. I'm like, oh, it felt like a real moment in time, that high-performing team. I learned a lot. I created brilliant connections. I enjoyed it. I was just enjoying the work that I was doing. And it definitely taught me a lot. So I didn't have learning there, actually. But I think if I think about, those moments of really high growth in your career, I really felt like I grew a lot during that kind of couple of year period. So what haven't I got on feelings that you had on your list? Perhaps shout them out to Freya, and Freya can always shout them out to me if I can't hear them.
Anything missing from this list of Sarah's? Angela? That might be the mics and the ceiling. Sorry, stand closer to the whiteboard. Right, okay, try again. Thank you. Yeah, so that's friendliness, Sarah, and people feeling able to be vulnerable.
Brilliant one. Love the vulnerability one. That's a really good build. Vulnerability. Yeah, you don't have to pretend to know the answers. You can say you don't know. Great build.
Any other? Yeah.
Valued?
Yeah, feeling valued. We had that in the group I was talking to. So yeah, recognized, valued. Yeah.
Yes, really nice.
Yes.
They can be themselves rather than be forced to someone they don't want.
Yeah, comfortable to be yourself, your authentic self. Yeah, not needing to pretend to be someone you're not. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You can say to innovate and experiment.
Yeah, free to innovate and experiment.
Lovely one. I'm running out of space for good contributions. I love that one around experiment and to innovate, to try things out, maybe permission to kind of fail along the way, and that feeling fine. We don't expect everyone to be kind of perfect all the time. Anything else before we go on to behaviours?
Any others?
We good?
Trust. No, we haven't had trust actually.
No, we
Trust.
haven't. No.
Trusting others, feeling trusted yourself.
Yeah.
All of the above. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. So it feels brilliant, right? Who doesn't want to be in a team that feels like this? And then when you see the behaviours, a few that I wrote down, and then we'll build on them together. Feedback. So other than what I do today, and partly because we literally like talk about feedback and have written books about feedback, so we have a lot of feedback in Amazing If. But this other high performing team that I'm thinking about when I was at Sainsbury's, it's the one team where I saw loads of feedback from everyone. So like my board director would ask me for feedback. Feedback sort of flowed in every different direction. It was, everybody saw it as, oh, that's how we just get better. That's how we improve. Feedback both about what we were good at and about kind of our even better ifs as well. And feedback is hard, right? You know, there's lots of fears around feedback. So I did write feedback. I wrote failures. I really remember being in that team, and one of my sort of not so incredible claims to fame is that when I was in that team, I made a TV program, a live TV program that was on at lunchtime every day called What's Cooking. And it was sort of Sainsbury's funded. So like Sainsbury's basically paid for this TV show to happen. And we built a studio in the car park of one of our stores. And as you can imagine, it was a really expensive investment. I was working in marketing at the time. And it was very high profile. So I felt very vulnerable. I was definitely the person associated and leading that project. And we did a series. I think it was something like 65 live episodes, which I can tell you is terrifying. And really, it cost us a lot of money, but we couldn't quite see the return. We couldn't quite see the value. And what was interesting about being in that kind of high trust team, that high performing team, is that definitely you could view that as a failure. Like, we spent all this money, we're not really sure if it's been worth it. Sure, people have enjoyed the program, but commercially, it's probably got to work a bit harder than that. And I really remember my boss at the time talking about the fact that we weren't going to do a second series and how she talked about it. So I wasn't sure how to feel. I was like, well, have I failed? Have I got this really wrong? And she just talked about it as like a brilliant experiment. It was like, we definitely made the right decision to give this a go. You know, we've learned a lot. We're not going to do a second series, and there's some really good reasons why, and here they are. But, you know, there's a difference between a project not working, and you might go, well, that project failed, and I think you could feel okay, and that would be a fair thing to say, versus I am a failure. And I think she made the difference between, I think I could have gone, well, I have failed. And it was more like, no, do you know what, that we experimented and it just sort of didn't do quite what we needed it to do. So I think failure is an interesting one. Asking for help. So you'd hear people, it doesn't always have to sound like a cry for help, but it's like, oh, I could do with some support on, or I would appreciate your perspective on. So we sort of all really appreciated getting other people's thoughts and their insights and their inputs. What else did I have? Oh yeah, we celebrated success. So the good stuff, like what was going well. And people did have those hard conversations. And I remember coming into that team, and the first time I saw it, I'm naturally not brilliant at conflict. It's something I have to work hard on to do well. And I remember seeing two of my peers in the same leadership team having like a really hard conversation where they kind of directly disagreed with each other. And we're both quite passionate about, well, I think we should do A and I think we should do B. And I was sort of more an observer in that conversation. And I was very tense. As somebody who does find conflict difficult, I was like, well, they don't get on very well and this is awful. But they'd have this challenging conversation and it would be absolutely fine. They would just see, they'd be like, oh, we'll get to better answers because we can have these hard conversations and it is okay to disagree. And then there are moments that once we've made that decision, we will then always back each other. And it was the first time that I'd really seen that in action, you know, kind of really healthy debate to get to better outcomes where it didn't matter how senior you were, what job you did, everybody's opinion was kind of equally valued. And it was okay to say, I've got a different point of view, or I've got something I'm worried about here, or have we thought about our customers, or have we thought about these colleagues, or I think we've missed something really important. So people definitely all felt like they could sort of stress test things, which I think is quite unusual. It's quite hard to create an environment where that can happen for everyone, not just for more senior people. And a lot of that comes down to role modeling. One of the things that we'll talk about in a bit is just how much role modeling matters. What we do always matters way more than anything that we say. So if you see other people doing this, like involving everybody in kind of challenge and debate and constructive conversations, then we all follow suit. What didn't I have? So thinking about behaviours, anything I missed that you came up with in your groups?
Voices. I just wanted to mention there, Sarah, listening to what you're saying, that UCL have made a series of films called Disagreeing Well, which is really interesting. We might share them with you afterwards, but it made me think what you're saying. Yeah, behaviours. Did anyone want to feed in some?
Hello. So this is our team here, and we felt that behaviours is what you demonstrate. So I think some of our responses don't quite sort of fit those that are on the board, albeit very good ones, but we, as behaviours, we felt approachability was important within a high performing team.
So approachability, Sarah.
Yeah.
Any others? Yeah.
We had empathy.
Empathy, which may link to the approachability, actually. Yeah.
Of empathy.
Was that yours as well? Yeah.
Yeah, I think empathy is a great build. That ability to walk in other people's shoes, kind of see the world from a different person's perspective. I think approachability is also a really good one. Not one I've given loads of thought to, actually, but I think it's true. When you kind of instinctively go, in those high-performing teams, are people approachable within the team, regardless of what level they're at? Definitely.
The group I was in had helping each other, and actually
Lovely.
that kind of is similar to approachability, in that you feel able to go and ask people stuff.
Yes.
And communication was another one, which
That's a good one. Yeah, that's a good one.
Another one.
Taking and especially seeking responsibility.
People
are not, when there's something to be done, you don't have to give the job to somebody will
step up.
Then they'll agree to do it. So we rely on it.
Did you catch that, Sarah? Taking and seeking responsibility, a willingness to step up without having to be asked. That's a really good one. I've definitely seen that in really strong teams I've worked in, is you don't have to say who's going to do this and eyeball everyone before anyone says yes. Yeah.
So I'm going to summarize that as initiative. To me, that sounds like, it might not be the right word, but what you're kind of describing is, sort of people take initiative, maybe accountability. We might put accountability next to that as well. It doesn't feel like people are waiting to be told kind of what to do. It's like everybody sort of takes that initiative, they take individual accountability and they take the ownership. So we don't have what we would call a kind of say-do gap. Oh, yeah, I'll do that. And then it sort of either doesn't happen. And also you sort of trust that everybody's, that sort of, like we're kind of all adults and kind of those adult to adult conversations. It's not like when I'm trying to get my 8-year-old to do his homework and he takes zero initiative and zero accountability. We go, no, actually, we all get that as a high performing team, we will all do that. And so it doesn't feel like you've kind of got people who are not pulling their weight. Anything else, Freya, that people want to add before we move on?
Anything else from the room? Mutual respect.
Yes, lovely. Yeah. And maybe respecting people's differences, their kind of distinctive differences, like what everybody brings to that team.
So yeah, healthy challenge, I suppose, links to that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. So we know that typically tends to be a question where we can either imagine or we're already in a team where we think, well, we know what good looks like. So we kind of know what we're aiming for or aspiring to. And when we think about a high trust team, it's often interesting just to kind of think about what happens if you're not in one, potentially. And these are like with anything with a framework. And as soon as you do a matrix, it always kind of feels a bit binary, but it is useful just to think about. Because typically we've not spent all of our careers in a high trust team. If you have, amazing, but most of us have not. So sometimes you will be in a high trust environment, but low performance. So that is where you often do fall into the trap of kind of niceness. Lots of organisations talk to us about this. Everyone's nice, everyone gets on really well, but there's a sort of sense of comfort that actually is getting in the way. People are often in these kinds of cultures, people don't tend to have hard conversations. Maybe sometimes there's a risk of operating on autopilot or sort of status quo, perhaps not as challenging for continual improvement and sort of getting better. So people don't tend to kind of mind that, but definitely limiting learning, like limiting growth individually and together. You can be in a kind of low performing team and a low trust team. Obviously never great, like none of us want to kind of be there. And that's where people don't care. Like none of us would care. There's no trust, there's not good performance. The level of care and commitment is really low. It's not a good place, never a good place to be. Over here, which I think is often the hardest one, is when you're in a high performance culture, but there's low trust. I don't know if any of you have watched, I'm watching at the moment a show that just won a BAFTA called Industry on BBC, based in financial services. And I worked in financial services, so I feel like it is okay to say this. And you watch that programme, and I would say some of what's described in that programme, which is fictional, is sort of in this category. So high performance, low trust. And this is where you get toxic cultures. This is also where you get burnout. They are not good places to be, and they're certainly not very sustainable. Again, sometimes you work with companies at maybe different stages of their growth that are here, and people are usually exhausted and really drained. Very hard to be at your best if kind of that's how people are feeling. And then up here is obviously what we're aiming for around this is where you do get the high performance. And when we think about this, obviously this is not sort of something that you achieve and then you're done, that you kind of tick off the to-do list. It would almost be easier if it was. It's something that almost you need to keep committing to. You need to kind of go, well, we need to keep thinking about what does this look like for us? How do we continue to build trust? Because you sort of earn trust, don't you, together? How do we continue to drive performance? And thinking about those two things kind of together and what that looks like. One of my favourite leadership books is called Why Should Anyone Be Led by You? And the two professors from London Business School, Rob Joffe and Gareth Jones, they did loads of work all across the world on these leaders who were brilliant and doing a great job that people wanted to work with and for. And one, they found there's no blueprint for being a brilliant leader, which I found reassuring. I'm like, great, I'm not gonna try and be something I'm not. But what all these leaders did have in common was a real commitment to just continually learning, continually improving, not expecting there to be a moment where you could sort of go, brilliant, I'm done. So essentially it was this create, not wait mindset. It was always knowing that you'll be a work in progress, individually and together. So some of this I think is about mindset, some of it is about skill set. So we are just going to spend 5 minutes now on the problems, because we've sort of described the nirvana that we all wish we worked in, day out. But, and for most of us, it's usually not as dramatic as this. It's not like, oh, we're full toxic or we're full comfort. But for most of us, there are probably only maybe a couple of moments in your career where you really go, that was a really high performing team, high trust, high performing kind of together. And so I'm really interested now in what gets in the way. We don't want to avoid the problems, much better to be open about them, to kind of talk about them, because then we can think, okay, well, how do we explore those problems? How do we approach those problems with kind of curiosity? So 5 minutes now, sort of permission to just talk about the problems. What gets in the way? If you're online, if you just put those in the chat, we'll talk about those together, and then we'll move from awareness into action. Never like to spend too long in that area, because we could all luxuriate sometimes in discussing the problems. I had some from our conversation online, so I'm going to summarize those, and then we'll get some from the room. So one of the ones, or perhaps two things that I bring together might be, I might describe as pace and space. So, you know, sometimes if we're under a lot of pressure, if we've got deadlines and we're kind of going quite fast, maybe some of the things that we might describe that we kind of want in a high performing team might feel quite hard to make happen. So maybe pace could get in the way, and space around this takes effort. You know, I think when we describe all of those things, this doesn't just happen by accident. It's very intentional. So have we sort of got the headspace? Have we got the capacity? Have we got the energy to make this happen? One of the other things that came up, and actually I read something on this recently that I found really interesting, is, you know, that classic like saying or suggestion of, like, you know, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. Actually, often that gets in the way of high trust, high performing teams. In teams that are really high performing, people obviously do talk about problems, but they don't do it in a, and you've got pressure to have like the right answer or the solution. They do it more around, you know, if we've got problems, let's make suggestions. And actually being really open to exploring problems together to get to kind of better answers as a group, rather than feeling like, well, I can't ever talk about a problem unless I've got a sort of perfect solution. And actually that really, that resonated with me, certainly earlier in my career in some big companies. No way would I talk to my manager about a problem, almost like to explore it together. You felt like you had to kind of go, well, this is the problem, but don't worry. I've already sorted it. I've already, you know, almost like I've already fixed it before I even then talk to you about it. Whereas actually in those high trust, high performing teams, it's not that people are kind of lazy. It's not they're not coming up with ideas, but it's sort of your approach to problem solving is slightly different. There's a great article actually I read on that I'll include in your playlist after today. And micromanagement, a classic one. If everybody feels like they are being micromanaged in any organisation, often happens without even sometimes people realising it, makes it really hard for everyone to feel like they are kind of contributing or their voices can be heard. So lots of reasons why we don't like micromanagement, but it would definitely get in the way of high performance. What else? What else gets in the way before we talk about what we're going to do about it?
What came up in the room?
We identified that academia.
Precarity.
Oh, sorry. You and then sorry. Sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, we identified in academia in our experience, ego is a
Yeah.
big one.
Yeah.
Individualism.
Yeah. That, I suppose that culture, but when you're competing, I think for funding and for that doesn't help with psychological safety and trust, does it? And group problem solving. Sorry, precarity. Yeah.
So we're all on, many of us are on short-term contracts.
Yeah.
So we have very nervous feeling about when it continues.
I think it can create a really challenging climate for this stuff or fixed term contracts. Anything from this side? Yeah.
Being on too many different teams.
Oh, yes. Pulled in a million different directions. Yeah. Too many different teams. That was Sarah. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Or like loads of different priorities.
Yes.
You know, so you're trying to do 5 things at once rather than one thing really well.
Yeah, I recognise that. Yep.
Toxic culture. So it's sort of this idea, especially again, it comes up in academia where it's, this is just the way things are, right? And then sort of gaslighting people when they come to you and say, I want something better. Well, this is the way it is.
There's a lot of that, isn't there? This is Cambridge. It's always Cambridge. Just, and it's, yeah, I hear that all the time. You're like an acceptance that we can't do anything differently and that we're not going to bother. Yeah.
So sort of sticking with the status quo.
Actually, yeah. Yes. Yes.
Or accidental.
Information hiding, Sarah. I had that in my earlier group. I said, yeah, information sharing, but same thing, yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was reading something about that recently because we've written something about like sharing knowledge and sharing learning, and like why there's some interesting research about why that doesn't happen in organizations. Because it's sometimes called like hoarding, you know, like you could sometimes hoarding talent, hoarding information, hoarding knowledge. And sometimes it's because people see it as their competitive advantage. They're like, well, if I share that, that's kind of my competitive advantage, maybe for my career. Sometimes people don't share because they just don't know how or when to, kind of the opportunity sort of doesn't present itself, or they don't share because they don't see anyone else sharing. And so we're like, well, no one else seems to be kind of sharing knowledge or kind of what they know. So I shouldn't do that either. You know, I should kind of keep it to myself. And happens actually in loads of different kinds of companies, even in companies where you'd imagine it's really important to share knowledge. Often, yeah, it doesn't, but for different reasons.
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you say about someone has to go first. It's like you show me yours if I, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Anything else in the room? This is your opportunity to say the things that bug you most. Bureaucracy.
Yeah, I mean that can that's a good word, right, for like loads of stuff. You know, like the processes, the paperwork, we have to do this in this way because this is kind of how it works. Okay, I think now we've
So we have one more point there, sorry.
go on, sorry.
Oh,
Indecisiveness.
indecisiveness. Yeah, that's
Good
interesting.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, really good one. Yeah, if people don't feel empowered to make decisions or make choices, that kind of gets in the way. Sort of the opposite of the ego one, which I think I heard at the start, which also gets in the way, but for different reasons. Because ego is, well, there's one way and there's a right way, so everybody kind of has to do that. Which you know, if you've got those kind of egos, then again, it's very difficult to do what we're going to describe. Right, so what we are going to do is we are now going to think about your experience today. Oh, my screen just disappeared. 1 second. Freya, can you still see? Yeah, can you still
Oh,
see
I
the
can see
screen?
it, yep, we're
Good, good, good. We're going to think a bit about your experience today in terms of the team you're in right now. And we're going to try and come up with some actions that everybody can take. So often, one of the challenges that I observe with high trust, high performing teams when companies do work in this area is it can feel quite big and it can feel a bit overwhelming and therefore hard to make happen for you in your world. So what we want to try and do is kind of break it down so that there's something we can do, even if we are nudging it forward for ourselves in our own careers, or even if we're just nudging it forward together within our teams. You're probably not going to do this across all of Cambridge. Now, let's say yet, let's all be hopeful and be like, yet. But there's always, I think, something that we can do in our own way, in our own worlds. So pens and paper at the ready. Can you please all draw this spider diagram? So you need 7 prongs and the scale is 0 to 5. I'm just going to give you like 1 minute to do that. Just do it really quickly and kind of sketchily, but we are going to fill out the spider diagram together. So you'll just all need it ready to go. Okay, hopefully we are good to go. So what we are going to talk about is 7 different characteristics that consistently come up in high trust and high performing teams. It doesn't mean that there aren't others, it's just a good place to start. So I'm going to ask you to assess yourself on each of these 7 characteristics. Like, does this happen in your team? Are you a 5 out of 5? You're brilliant at this as a team. This is the thing you're really good at. 0, non-existent. 1 is like, I mean, hardly ever. Maybe you do it, but you don't kind of really see it elsewhere. So you judge your own scale, but 5 is brilliant. This is us at our best. 0 is never. We would never do this. So first one, let's start with mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. Within your team, do you feel like mistakes are shared and are they learnt from? And are they seen as an opportunity to grow your performance and to get even better? If it is no, there is 0 tolerance around mistakes, then we're at 0. If you are sharing and learning from mistakes all the time, that's just kind of part of how you work. It's kind of a habit that you've got, you would be a 5. And you know, you think about what a mistake looks like in your world. I'll give some examples from Amazing If in a bit. Next one, those challenging conversations. So do those challenging conversations happen? Remembering that this is about, you know, high care and high challenge. So if you're having challenging conversations, but they are low care, then your score would be low. So these need to feel like constructively challenging conversations, but people are what we would call, they are saying the hard thing. Like that's often one of the kind of questions that I will ask, like, are you saying the hard thing? Is there the chance to say the hard thing? Like, do people disagree with each other in a way that feels kind of really healthy in terms of like describe that team that I was part of? It's definitely something I've learned from watching other people do it well and being part of good teams that do this. We had this in our groups when we were describing what it feels like and looks like to be in a high performing team. This idea of belonging. Do you feel like people can be themselves and bring as much of themselves to work as they want to? I might put a couple of scores here as well, just to show you. So I might say, I'm going to do amazing if here. I'll talk about why we're so high on that in a minute. We might be there and we might be there. So you can start to join up your X's. You'll end up with a wonky spider web. So that's belonging. People can be themselves. And, you know, is that kind of sense of connection and care. Interesting, on the cover of Harvard Business Review just before Christmas, they were talking a lot about loneliness and people not feeling like they belong to organisations or to teams. Interestingly, nothing to do with where you work, much more about kind of your sense of connection. Next, do you feel, and this was a great contribution we had, do you feel like people can experiment, or it's sometimes described as kind of risk? You know, sort of, do you know what the right kind of risk is within your team? In a high performing team, people don't sort of play it safe the whole time. We do try stuff out, we experiment, we take some risks that feel right. You know, if you're talking to a bank here and you talk about risk, they all kind of go like, no, like they get very, obviously people get very nervous about risk in a financial service setting. And so you've got to figure out as well, like, what does this mean kind of for you? But are you trying stuff out? Are you experimenting? Where would you kind of score yourself and your team on that one? Then we've got, and we've talked about this one, do you think people ask for the help that they need? So this might be, doesn't have to be, like I said, oh, like, help. Though it might be, sometimes it might be that, but it might be, I'd like your perspective, point of view. Do we kind of seek out those kind of conversations where it does feel okay to maybe say, I'm stuck, I'm not sure, I've got lost in the complexity of this, I need somebody with a fresh pair of eyes, those kinds of conversations. So where are you on that one? Next one, do you feel like it is a kind of supportive environment where you're one team? This is kind of the point of, like, you know, when you all feel like you have got each other's back. So yes, you might disagree, but ultimately, one team, one dream. You know, does it feel like people are more individual or more kind of together and kind of collective in their mindset? And some of those problems that you described to me before might get in the way of this some of the time, might make this harder to do. So score yourself wherever you might be for this. And that might not be true. That was just me sort of saying potentially. And the last one, really important one, on people's strengths. In a high performing team, people's strengths are sort of understood by each other. So this is, you know, appreciating all of our distinctive differences in terms of what we all bring. So our strengths are both useful and utilised. So I would say, you know, well, I know that Freya has got a strength of strategic thinking and asking brilliant coaching questions. So I sort of know that about her. And actually that strength is used in the work that we might do together and also kind of appreciated by everybody kind of across the group. So where would we see ourselves for that one? And so you should now have on your bits of paper a wonky spider web. No one is 5 out of 5 all of the time because, you know, none of us are that good. But what I find useful about this is it helps us to figure out, where are we already good? Let's give ourselves some credit for what we are already doing well. I bet you have some 4 or 5s. That there will be some where you think, do you know what, as a team, we're good at that. We do recognise each other's strengths. People do feel a sense of belonging, whatever it might be. And so just sort of going, there are some things that we already do well, and we should keep doing those because that is helping us to be a high trust and a high performing team. Equally, there will be some gaps. So perhaps the mistake one, you were thinking, actually, no, I was, perhaps you scored yourself a 1 or a 2. You're kind of much lower on that. it's a gap that you've got. It's what we would call an even better if. Be even better if we were learning from each other's mistakes. It would be even better if, I don't know, we were experimenting a lot more and kind of trying things out more. We talked earlier about in those kind of teams, you do get innovation. You know, people are testing things, some things are failing, kind of some things are working, and everything in between. So if you were prioritizing now, out of those 7 areas, I'd just like you to kind of highlight for yourself or kind of circle for yourself, which is the one that you think, if as a team you did some work on this one, it would make the most difference. Because you might have a few similar scores, but I am now kind of forcing you to prioritize. So if you were picking one, you might be like, actually, if we could just do that better, I feel like that would, you know, sort of some small changes might have quite a significant impact. Or if we could just somehow think a little bit more about kind of the one team, one dream thing, I feel like that would have a kind of really big impact. So circle one. So if I was circling one for our Amazing If team, if I was sort of doing this for actually the team I'm in right now, I would probably circle this one. We've got lots of very, very supportive people in Amazing If who don't have challenging conversations very often. Helen and I do. So Helen is my co-founder, but we are only 2 people. So it's not consistent. I'm like, well, Helen and I can disagree, and we've learned how to disagree together, and we've learned how to fix friction between the 2 of us. So if I was scoring this just for our relationship, actually it would be higher. But actually, if I think across the team, I very rarely hear people say, I'm trying to think if I've ever heard anyone say, I disagree, or I've got a different point of view. Helen and I say it to each other all the time. But we have got, like I said, lots of the kind of personalities in our team. They're very supportive. They're very empathetic, all things that are brilliant and strengths that we love about our team. But I'm not sure that that means then we always naturally kind of critique things, or I'm trying to think also, how often do people say to Helen and I, I'm not sure you've got that right, or you've got the wrong approach. I'm like, okay, that feels like an area of opportunity. We want to continue to kind of drive the trust and kind of develop our performance. That would be an area that I would be thinking about in terms of actions. What do we need to do differently? What do we need to do more of? Perhaps we could just do a show of hands in the room, and I might just need kind of Freya to interpret. I can't quite see well enough to figure out where you all are. But if you could just kind of raise your hand when I get to the one that you've identified as your biggest area of opportunity. So show of hands if it's mistakes.
Not many there. Only
Not
one.
many. Okay, so we're actually feeling quite, I might just do some dots to remind myself. We're feeling quite good about that. Show of hands if it's challenging conversations.
Yeah, quite a few more there. Yeah.
Yeah, that is tough. Show of hands if it's belonging.
Only a couple. Oh, a handful. Yeah.
Experimenting risk, trying things out. Show of hands.
Oh, quite a lot there.
Oh, okay. Okay, that one. Asking for help. Any hands there?
Quite a few there as well.
Okay, I can see quite a few there. One team, one dream, sort of supporting each other.
Yeah, quite a few there as well.
There as well. And strengths. Strengths feeling utilised and useful. Can't see as many hands there, Freya, is that right?
Yeah, does that need a bit of clarification, that strengths point? So that was where people feel recognised for their strengths and they're making use of them, is that right?
Yeah.
Less hands there. Yeah.
Less hands there. Okay, great. So what we are going to do is we're going to move kind of into action mode now. This gives us awareness, but we need to take an action. And I always think scales are useful because they give you a starting point. So my kind of challenge to all of you now is thinking about what is an action that you could take that would nudge you up that scale from a 1 to a 2, from a 2 to a 3. So in your groups, I'd like you to pick one, just one. Don't try to do them all. I am going to do this at the same time as you. So not knowing what you were going to pick. So maybe you pick challenging conversations, for example, just pick that one. And I'd like you as a group to come up with an action that you think you could take within your teams that would nudge you up that scale just by 1. So make it a realistic action, make it feel relevant. And if you really want to kind of challenge yourselves, ask yourself, like, when would we take this action? So if you're coming up with something to do with like asking for help, maybe even try and spot like, well, when would this happen? Is it in a meeting or moment we've already got? anything we can come up with in terms of actions to add in to what we already do, we stand a much better chance of making it stick. So let's just say, if I was like, oh, well, we'll add in an extra meeting where everybody sort of talks about one thing that they need help with. The challenge with that, you know, that potentially could be a good idea, but then I've got to like add in one more meeting. Everyone's already busy. Does it feel a bit forced? What if I've not got any help that I need that day? Is that a meeting that people are going to look forward to? Not sure. Might be. Could be the best idea ever. So try and come up with an action. Try and think about like when that action might happen. And as you're doing that, I will focus on the 4 that you've also identified as your biggest gaps and share some ideas that we've tested and other organisations have tested in case that gives you some extra inspiration. So we'll do about 5 minutes for you to come up with just one action and kind of the when. We'll share back and then I will finish by sharing some ideas for you to then kind of take away and try out. All good. Thank you, everybody. Sorry, I needed loads of time for that.
Oh. All right.
You can hear me, you can see me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Good.
See you.
Okay, brilliant. I'm going to just now share a few thoughts, and I've sort of prioritized those thoughts based on what you've shared with me. And what this might help you to do is to take the ideas and the actions you've already got. There might be something here that you think, well, that's a good edit or a good build, or you might have something even better already. So see these as kind of just a smorgasbord of extra ideas for action that you can kind of filter for yourself around your own usefulness. Like, how useful would that be? So on challenging conversations, I think if this is not natural in your team or your organization, you have to come up with ways to invite challenge. It is a hard thing to just expect everybody to start doing this. So how can we make it easier? So a few examples here of just sort of easy tools that make it easier to have kind of that constructive challenge. We could explore the opposite. You know, what would the opposite of this be? That makes you kind of challenge what you're doing today. The classic. Let's play devil's advocate for a moment and just sort of look at something from a different perspective. It kind of makes you think in a kind of opposite way. I always like this one. What would ... do? Think about a company or a person or I don't know, an alternative university that are different to you. And you might go, well, what would they do? I mean, you could also just choose someone very inspirational who you think are amazing, an organization that you're like, oh, we learn a lot from them. But sort of putting yourself in someone else's shoes invites a lot of challenge. Sometimes we do it in Amazing If from a country perspective. So if we ask ourselves like, well, what would we do if we were in the US? Because the US approach some of the work that we do in quite a different way. And that just sometimes frees up ideas, makes us kind of think a bit differently, makes us kind of challenge ourselves. Very live right now because we've just had our book is coming out simultaneously next year in the UK and in the US. And sometimes so we see the live reality of like, what would the US do? And then we'll perhaps talk to our UK publisher and they've got a very different point of view. So that's kind of really interesting. It's actually it's a good way to sort of practice challenge. And this has worked for me loads of times in companies. Often when I was working on a project or something that I wanted to make progress on, I would almost invite people to kill it. Now, doesn't work all the time. So there's always some caution around this. But, you know, sort of asking, well, what's the worst thing about this? Why wouldn't this work? What would stop us from doing this? And actually, when I used to do that in Sainsbury's, that would invite challenge, but that would also really help to get people on board. Because what does everybody start to do? They sort of go, well, I think you've got this bit wrong. So they are kind of constructively challenging you, but they often start to go, but if you approached it this way, or if you thought about involving these colleagues, that would probably really help you with that. So, you know, you have to feel like it's going to be constructive because you don't want people to just pull you apart. And so that would leave me feeling quite bruised, I think. But actually, if it's the right kind of group and the right kind of people, almost having a play with some of these can be quite useful. So maybe just the questions that you ask. Also, maybe using something like challenge and build.
You've lost your screen. Oh, that's good.
You see?
Yeah.
Yeah, all good.
No, good.
I think sometimes the way that you frame these as well can be helpful. So in Amazing If, we have meetings where we actually call the meeting challenge and build moments. So it's just a name. But the words we use do shape kind of how we see the world, and the lens that we look at things through. And this has helped our team as we're kind of nudging ourselves forward on this one. We often use something called a project on a page that you can see here. And then we will send that to people beforehand so that people have a sense of something that we might be thinking about doing. Maybe it's, I don't know, a new program we might think about running or a new idea that we've got. And then we say, oh, we're going to do a kind of challenge and build moment around this project. And the way that we do it is that if it's your project, you sort of can't defend it. So what you have to do is just you're inviting lots of challenge and build. So rather than spending lots of time like rationalizing, oh, well, this is why, or this is what I thought, you just sort of listen. You listen to kind of people challenge and build. You might ask them questions, and that gets people more confident with doing that kind of challenge. If you feel like people are not very confident doing that today, like in Amazing If, you don't need Helen and I to do challenge and build. We already do that with each other. We need to help our teams to do that with us. So often this will be Helen and I leading it, but then our job when we're in these moments is really to listen. And I do like this phrase. This is something that we're doing lots of work on with organisations, which we're calling just say the hard thing. And so you could just do that. Like, should we all just say the hard thing? You know, and actually that might just be a way of making it easier. You could also think about the questions that you're asking. You know, what's top of your worry list right now? That helps our team to tell me things that I think they're not telling me because they don't want to worry me, but I want to know. We know that in those high trust, high performing teams, people do share bad news. It was interesting, actually. I heard a CEO talk this morning where he almost said, oh, you know, I don't hear anything from that team, so it must all be going well. And I was thinking, because nothing is always going well, you know, in any team. And so actually, if I was a CEO and I'm not hearing anything going wrong from a team, I would just think, well, it is going wrong, they're just not telling me. So I want people to share what's on their worry list, or asking questions like, what have we missed, or what might I have missed, or what feels hardest to make happen about what we've just described. Again, you're just inviting challenge. So maybe just think about, is there a way in your team, and that could be you and one other person or you and 10 other people, that you could make it easier to say the hard thing? Like, what might that look like? Hopefully, a kind of few thoughts there to get you started. On experiments and trying things out, my starting point would be to be unapologetically easy. I would take familiar frustrations or pain points that you've already got. Too many meetings is often a classic one. And I would think about what could we experiment with in terms of what we already do. So just back to that phrase that I mentioned before, adding in versus adding on. Add in an easy experiment to something you already do. So let's take meetings, for example, because it is a kind of classic pain point. Too many, and the ones I'm in are not useful enough. What could you experiment with in terms of the meetings that you run or that you're maybe in charge of? So for example, one of the things that we've experimented with is rather than just having an agenda, having what's called a decision or discussion agenda. So you don't just bullet point everything you're going to talk about. You bullet point either decisions that need to be made or the discussion that needs to be had. So everyone comes prepared and ready. It helps everyone to find a bit of focus. It creates clarity, potentially. The point with an experiment is you have a hypothesis, right, about what it's going to do. It might not do that. The other thing I encourage people to do around experimenting is subtracting. Nobody ever talks about subtracting in meetings or in organisations. But like, what could we take away? Maybe we could take away 10 minutes. We could make them shorter. Maybe, I mean, this is always like sensitively, maybe we don't need as many people. Maybe it could be a stand-up meeting. Maybe it doesn't need to be a recurring meeting. One company, Shopify, stopped recurring meetings for 2 weeks. They wrote some code to stop them. And after 2 weeks, anyone who wanted to could put the recurring meeting back in. So it was like, we're going to go dramatic. We're going to take them all away because they worked out how much it was costing them. And then we'll put them back in if they kind of really matter. 15% of those meetings went back in. So you just think about from that 2-week experiment, obviously they got the tech to kind of do that, just then how much time and money they then saved as a result. Kind of really quite a small change that had a really significant impact. So when we are designing experiments, start with what you already do, meetings and moments you already have. And then I actually always start with what's annoying me, what feels frustrating, maybe what are the kind of recurring red flags, what people complaining about. And I remember reading this phrase, like when those things are happening, you've got 2 choices. You can either keep complaining or you can try and change something. And I prefer the change something. So easy experiments are a good way to just low pressure play. The word experiment, again, is also often quite helpful for us here. These are really good to design as a team. So maybe if you're thinking about an action after today, you could agree as a team what's feeling frustrating. That's always usually the easy bit. And then you can have a go at designing some easy experiments. You know, it doesn't matter whether they work or not. The only experiments that fail are when we fail to learn. They're designed for learning. So that's kind of all we really care about when we're experimenting. And just thinking about help. So a few of you kind of talked about help. Often I think to make it easier, again, to ask for help, give people a bit of a structure about, well, what kind of help will be most useful for them? Sometimes we just need support. You know, someone who's like amazing at listening. Sometimes we need a sounding board, someone who's great at ideas. And sometimes we are stuck and we need solutions. Think about for yourself, what is your natural helping state? So my natural help state is this, because I'm good at ideas. My co-founder's natural help state is this. Now you imagine what happens sometimes if you don't signal the help that you need. Maybe actually the help that I need is support, but Helen's go-to way of being helpful is to fix it, is to come up with solutions. And those people are brilliant and we need those people, but we don't always need them all of the time. So sort of know how you can be helpful, but also never be afraid to sort of signal the help that you need or to ask someone, you know, what would be most useful for you? Is it, you know, do you need some support? Do you need a sounding board? Do you need solutions? I now ask that question of our team all the time. You know, what's most useful for you? How can I be helpful for you? Maybe even as a team, one of the things you could just do is go, of those 3, what's my natural help state? Everyone is usually good at one of those 3. Maybe there's one that I've missed, but perhaps as a team talk about that. Because actually the rest of our team in Amazing If are very good at this one. Really good listeners. These people tend to be very empathetic. They don't try and solve it for you. They just, you know, like they hear you out. They give you the space to speak. They're very good at not interrupting. I love these people. But it's not me in my natural state. You can obviously learn all of these things. So maybe it's about asking each other this, but also kind of thinking about your profile across the team. After today, we will give you a playlist of things to read, watch, and listen to learn more, and even more ideas if you kind of want more ideas. But certainly my suggestion after today is one action is always better than no action. And so just think a little bit, oh yeah, I always like this, I will just say this. When you are working on this as a team, don't feel like you have to solve this all by yourself. Like work together, kind of involve, don't solve. And I do like this from Amy Edmondson. Confidence and humility are not opposites. And Professor Amy Edmondson over at Harvard has done a lot of the work, a lot of the pioneering research that's informed a lot of what we've kind of talked about today. So we can be really confident about getting better, improving and learning, and have that humility at the same time. And I like this idea that they are kind of happy twins rather than feeling like you're kind of either one or the other. So as I was saying, one action, just be jotting this down for yourself now. If you were thinking about an action that you think would make a difference, don't worry if it feels small, but like what's an action that maybe today has inspired you to think about? Could be something you talked about with the person you're sitting next to, could be something you've just heard from me today. Could even just be, you know, I want to read, watch and listen. I will finish there because I do know I'm sure you've all got you'll have other things to do with your day. Just to reinforce what I was trying to kind of finish by saying was take an action. Actions are how we kind of consolidate what you've heard from me today. Try things out. If there are things that you need that you've not heard today, please get in touch with me. I'm just Sarah with a H at amazingif.com, or you can connect me on LinkedIn, or Freya knows me really well and Freya can kind of point you in my direction. So, perhaps if you were thinking, oh, I was the one person where I wanted to do a bit more work on mistakes, I can also then help you, point you in the right direction for like what might be useful, or kind of share some extra ideas. We will share that playlist, and that will give you kind of lots more links to learn from. And if you're interested, it also has a link to our weekly newsletter, Squiggly Careers in Action. That's where we share things like borrowed brilliance, some how-to podcast episodes, and just kind of lots of things around kind of learning and development. So if you're particularly interested in that area, that might be worth looking at. But I hope today has felt useful. I'm sorry I'm not in the room with you. I always do like being in the room. It always kind of feels nice. But I hope it's still felt like something where you feel like, it's perhaps given you a bit of insight and understanding around what a high-performing team looks and feels like. But then most importantly, it's given you some inspiration in terms of actions that you can take.